My name is Lanny Rangers, and I've been keeping Rain Technologies' digital heart beating for 7 years. 7 years of 3 a.m. emergency calls where I'd stumble through my apartment like a zombie, laptop cord trailing behind me like a digital leash. 7 years of explaining why just restart it isn't always the magic solution to executives who think computers run on hopes and good intentions. 7 years of being the person everyone calls when the internet stops working but nobody invites to the company barbecue, probably because I once spent an entire pool party explaining why their Wi-Fi kept dropping out every time someone used the microwave. The memory hit me like a slap from a frozen Ethernet cable. Monday morning, 9:47 a.m., I remember the exact time because I was documenting everything in those days, a habit that would later save both my career and Rain Technologies' entire client base. I was elbow-deep in our server migration plan, surrounded by 3 monitors displaying what could only be described as a digital symphony. A beautiful, methodical spreadsheet that would make Marie Kondo weep with joy occupied my center screen. Each step color-coded like a rainbow of technical precision, green for completed tasks, yellow for in-progress items, red for potential disasters, and a special shade of orange I'd invented 4 things that will definitely break if Greg touches them. Each dependency was mapped with the obsessive detail of a conspiracy theorist connecting string between photos on a corkboard. Each risk assessment was documented with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker who'd had too much caffeine and a deep fear of failure. I'd been working on this upgrade for 3 months, turning it over in my mind like a Rubik's Cube until every angle was perfect, every scenario planned for, every possible point of failure anticipated and neutralized. That's when Gregory Caldwell, our CTO, strutted into the server room like he owned the place. Which, technically, he did. But ownership and understanding are 2 very different creatures, and Greg had only met one of them at a cocktail party where it was probably introduced as disruptive innovation or some other buzzword nonsense. Greg was the kind of CTO who'd read a TechCrunch article on his morning commute and immediately want to implement whatever startup was featured, regardless of whether it made sense for our infrastructure. He'd arrived at Rain Technologies 8 months earlier with an MBA from a school that probably cost more than my annual salary and a LinkedIn profile that used the word synergy unironically 17 times. I'd counted. His office was a monument to expensive ignorance, a standing desk he never stood at, a whiteboard covered in meaningless flowcharts that looked like abstract art, and enough startup stickers on his laptop to make a teenager jealous. The man collected buzzwords like some people collect stamps, and he was just as likely to use them inappropriately. Rangers, he said, not bothering to look up from his phone. Change of plans. We're moving everything to CloudMax solutions. Hot new vendor, cutting-edge infrastructure. Your little server shuffle is cancelled. I blinked. Slowly. The way you blink when someone tells you they're going to replace your grandmother's secret recipe with microwaved hot dogs, or when your doctor suggests treating your broken leg with essential oils and positive thinking. It was the kind of blink that processes approximately 17 different stages of technical grief in the span of 3 seconds. Greg, I said, my voice achieving that special tone reserved for explaining obvious things to people who should know better, we've been planning this migration for months. The new hardware is optimized for our specific workload patterns. Our database queries are tuned for these exact processor architectures. Moving to a generic cloud platform would be like trying to perform surgery with a butter knife, technically possible, but inadvisable and likely to result in significant bleeding. Too slow, he interrupted, finally gracing me with eye contact. His smirk could have powered our backup generators. This team needs agility, Rangers. Innovation. Not someone who takes 3 months to move some computers around. The words hung in the air like a bad smell, specifically, like the smell of burning electronics mixed with the cologne Greg bathed in every morning. I felt my face flush, that familiar heat of being dismissed by someone who thought IT was just turning things off and on again with extra steps and possibly some mystical incantations involving keyboard shortcuts. But here's the thing about being a woman in tech for 7 years, you develop a kind of professional poker face that would make casino dealers weep with envy. You learn to smile when inside you're screaming, to nod when you want to throw laptops, to stay calm when someone with half your experience and twice your salary tells you how to do your job. So I nodded. I stepped aside. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone else dig their own grave while you watch from a safe distance with popcorn and a detailed incident report. Sure thing, Greg. I'll document everything for the transition. His laugh was the sound confidence makes when it hasn't met reality yet, like a toddler announcing they can fly right before stepping off a coffee table. Don't worry about it. CloudMax handles everything. Seamless migration, they promised. Full-service digital transformation. We'll be operational by Friday, probably running better than we ever have. I watched him leave, his expensive shoes clicking against the server room floor with the rhythm of impending doom. Each click seemed to count down to disaster, click catastrophe, click catastrophe, click catastrophe. Then I did something that would either save my career or end it spectacularly. I kept working. But first, I made a cup of coffee. Good coffee. The kind you need when you're about to document the digital equivalent of the Titanic's maiden voyage. I settled back at my desk, cracked my knuckles like a pianist preparing for Carnegie Hall, and opened a new document. See, here's the thing about being dismissed, it's surprisingly liberating, like being fired from a job you hate but with the bonus of still getting paid to watch the chaos unfold. When someone removes you from the project, they also remove you from the blame. But they don't remove you from the building, and they certainly don't revoke your access to the documentation system, the server logs, or the institutional knowledge living in your brain like a very organized, very vindictive librarian. I spent that afternoon creating what I privately called the Gospel according to Lanny, a comprehensive breakdown of every critical system, every quirky workaround, every password that wasn't password 123, though embarrassingly, some were, usually accompanied by a sticky note saying temporary change next week, dated from 2019. This wasn't just documentation. This was a love letter to every server that had ever crashed at 2 a.m., every database that had ever corrupted during a demo, every network switch that had ever decided to take a personal day during a board meeting. I documented the peculiar way our customer database needed exactly 47 seconds between restart commands or it would corrupt itself like a digital diva having a tantrum. I noted how our email server had a nervous breakdown if you looked at it wrong on Tuesdays, literally Tuesdays. We'd tested this extensively after the third consecutive weekly meltdown. I wrote detailed explanations of why our backup system was configured in what appeared to be a completely nonsensical manner but actually accounted for a weird interaction between our storage array and the fire suppression system that had taken 2 weeks and 3 different vendor support calls to figure out. I documented the arcane ritual required to restart our customer-facing web application, a precise sequence of commands that had to be executed in exactly the right order, with exactly the right timing, or the entire thing would collapse like a house of cards in a tornado. Most importantly, I documented something Greg's seamless migration team would never think to check, the legacy authentication tokens embedded in our client-facing applications. These weren't just any tokens, they were custom-built, hard-coded little pieces of digital DNA that were married to our specific server infrastructure with the kind of commitment usually reserved for swans and tax liens. Tokens that would turn into digital pumpkins the moment our servers disappeared, leaving every client login attempt stranded like Cinderella after midnight. I even included a helpful diagram showing exactly how the authentication flow worked, complete with arrows and little warning symbols that I drew with the artistic flair of someone who'd spent too many late nights explaining technical concepts to executives who thought the cloud was just someone else's computer with better marketing. Tuesday came and went like a slow-motion disaster movie where you can see the asteroid approaching but nobody listens to the scientist with the unfashionable glasses and the urgent PowerPoint presentation. I watched from my desk, strategically positioned to have a perfect view of the server room through the glass partition, as CloudMax's team rolled in with their matching polo shirts and confident grins. They looked like a boy band that specialized in data migration, complete with a leader who probably had disruptive cloud evangelist on his business cards. Their equipment arrived on dollies like some kind of technological parade, sleek laptops that cost more than my car, monitors that could probably display the meaning of life in 4K resolution, and enough Ethernet cables to lasso a small building. They set up in our conference room, transforming it into mission control for what they kept calling the digital transformation event of the decade. I watched them work with the fascination usually reserved for nature documentaries about animals that are about to be eaten by bigger animals. They had flowcharts. They had timelines. They had a project manager who looked like she'd stepped out of a stock photo titled "Confident Businesswoman Points at Chart." What they didn't have was any apparent interest in talking to the person who'd kept these systems running for 7 years. I offered to help. Multiple times. Just want to make sure you have all the institutional knowledge, I said sweetly. Greg waved me off like an annoying fly at a picnic. We've got this handled, Rangers. CloudMax is the industry leader in seamless transitions. Maybe focus on updating your resume instead, might be time to find a role that matches your skill set. That last comment hit like a digital slap. Your skill set. As if 7 years of keeping Rain Technologies operational was some kind of quaint hobby, like collecting stamps or competitive knitting. As if the countless nights I'd spent troubleshooting crises while he slept soundly in his expensive sheets were just adorable little side projects. Wednesday, the servers went dark. Not gradually, not with warning, they just vanished from our network like they'd been raptured. I sat at my desk, watching our internal monitoring dashboard transform from a sea of reassuring green indicators to a wasteland of red alerts and error messages. It was beautiful in the way that natural disasters are beautiful, terrible and magnificent and completely inevitable if you'd been paying attention to the warning signs. Thursday, CloudMax announced everything was optimized and operational. Their monitoring dashboard, displayed proudly on the conference room's main screen, showed nothing but green lights and happy faces, the kind of simplified visualization that makes everything look perfect until you dig deeper than surface level. Greg walked by my desk twice that morning, each time with a little more swagger, like a peacock who'd just learned to strut. Their dashboard showed 100% uptime, perfect response times, and all systems nominal. What it didn't show was that none of our clients could actually access anything, because their monitoring system was only checking whether the servers responded to pings, not whether any actual business functionality was working. It was like declaring a restaurant fully operational because the lights were on, without bothering to check if anyone could actually order food. Greg sent an all-hands email about successful digital transformation and leaving legacy thinking behind that made me wonder if he'd generated it using some kind of corporate buzzword Mad Libs game. The subject line was Embracing Tomorrow, Rain Technologies Cloud-First Future, which sounded like something you'd read on the side of an energy drink marketed to entrepreneurs. I spent Thursday evening at home, sipping wine and watching Netflix with the kind of relaxed focus usually reserved for people who know they're about to be vindicated spectacularly. I'd chosen a documentary about the Titanic, seemed thematically appropriate. But I kept my phone on. Old habits, and also because I had a feeling Friday was going to be interesting in the way that ancient Chinese curses are interesting. My apartment felt different that night. Calmer. Like the eye of a hurricane, peaceful because you know the chaos is happening elsewhere and heading your way. I'd even made popcorn, because what's the point of watching a disaster unfold if you don't have snacks? Friday morning, 7:23 a.m. My phone buzzed like an angry wasp. Then buzzed again like the wasp had brought friends. Then started ringing with the persistent urgency of a smoke detector that's detected more than just burnt toast. The first text was from Samantha in customer service. Lanny, clients can't log in. Dashboard shows they're connected but authentication keeps failing. Any ideas? Getting absolutely destroyed here. The second was from Tommy in sales. Urgent, help. All demos are failing. Login screens just spin forever. 3 prospects walked out of meetings. Boss is having an aneurysm. The third was from Marcus in accounting. Payment processing is down. Clients can't update billing info. Finance director is already asking about revenue impact projections. The fourth was Greg, server room. Now. Not please come to the server room or, when you get a chance, could you swing by? Just now in all caps, which in email terms is basically digital screaming. I took my time getting dressed that morning. Iron-pressed slacks, the ones that make me look like I have my life together. My lucky blazer, the navy one that survived more technical emergencies than some people survive relationships. The good shoes, not my everyday comfortable flats, but the ones with just enough heel to add authority and just enough shine to reflect the light of burning bridges. If you're going to watch Rome burn, you might as well dress for the occasion. I even did my makeup, not because I needed to look good for the disaster, but because confidence is 70% preparation and 30% really good concealer. The drive to work felt like a victory lap in reverse. Every red light gave me more time to savor what was coming. I listened to classical music, specifically Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, because subtlety has never been my strong suit and today seemed like a day for dramatic theme music. The server room looked like a war zone designed by someone who'd only heard about war zones secondhand from people who'd watched war movies. CloudMax polo shirts were everywhere, their confident grins replaced by the kind of panic usually reserved for natural disasters or parents who've lost their children in a shopping mall. Laptops were open like wounded birds, their screens displaying error messages in multiple colors, red for critical, yellow for warning, and a special shade of orange that I'd never seen before but which clearly meant everything is very, very wrong. Phones were pressed to ears with the desperation of people calling their mothers after a breakup. The sweet smell of technical desperation filled the air, that unique combination of fear sweat, overheated electronics, and the kind of coffee that gets made when people are too panicked to notice it tastes like despair. Brad from CloudMax was standing in the center of the chaos like a general whose army had just realized they'd brought water balloons to a tank fight. His polo shirt, once crisp and confident, now looked like he'd been wrestling with server cables. His hair, which had been artfully tousled in that "I'm too busy innovating to worry about grooming" way, now just looked like he'd been electrocuted. That's when Greg burst through the door like a man possessed by the ghost of failed IT projects and broken quarterly earnings reports. His face had achieved a shade of red typically reserved for fire trucks, emergency exits, and tomatoes that have achieved perfect ripeness. His usually perfect hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it for hours, which, given the timeline of the disaster, he probably had. "Why did all our clients lose access?" he screamed, his voice reaching frequencies usually only achieved by teenagers at boy band concerts. The beautiful thing about that moment, and I mean beautiful in the way that perfect storms are beautiful, terrible and magnificent and completely unstoppable, was the silence that followed. Not server room silence, which is comfortable and filled with the gentle hum of machines doing their jobs. This was the silence of 20 people realizing they'd been spectacularly wrong and one person who'd been spectacularly right. It was the kind of silence that comes right before lightning strikes, pregnant with electricity and the promise of illumination. I pulled out my phone with the casual confidence of a magician about to perform their signature trick, opened my notes app, and began reading in the same tone you'd use to explain quantum physics to a golden retriever, patient, clear, and with just a hint of "I tried to tell you this already." The client authentication system uses legacy tokens tied to specific server instances and hardware fingerprints. When you migrated to CloudMax's infrastructure, those tokens became invalid because they're cryptographically bound to our original server signatures. Every client-facing application is now rejecting login attempts because it can't verify credentials against the original authentication database, which, by the way, requires our specific SSL certificate configuration to function properly. I paused, looked around the room at faces that had progressed through the 5 stages of technical grief and landed somewhere between acceptance and existential dread. It's all documented in the migration notes I prepared. The ones marked critical authentication dependencies. Right there in the folder labeled "Read this first or everything breaks." More silence. You could have heard a USB cable drop, a mouse click, or the sound of Brad's professional confidence deflating like a punctured balloon animal. Greg's mouth opened and closed like a fish that had just realized it was no longer in water. "But," he stammered, his voice now reduced to the kind of whisper people use in libraries and during moments of profound personal reckoning, "CloudMax said they handled everything. Full service migration." I looked at Brad, who was staring at his laptop screen like it had personally betrayed him, his family, and his childhood dreams. His face had gone through several interesting color changes and had settled on a pale green that suggested his breakfast was considering a dramatic reappearance. "Did you migrate the authentication token database?" I asked him directly, my voice maintaining that helpful tone that somehow made the question sound both innocent and devastating. "The what database?" Brad replied, and those 3 words contained enough confusion to power a small educational seminar on why institutional knowledge matters. And there it was. The moment when technical incompetence meets expensive consequences in a dark alley and expensive consequences wins decisively. Beautiful in its simplicity, devastating in its scope, perfect in its inevitability. How long to fix it? Greg's voice had dropped to a whisper that somehow managed to convey both desperation and the dawning realization that his seamless digital transformation had turned into a very expensive lesson in humility. I consulted my documentation, the same documentation they'd dismissed as legacy thinking and overcomplicated processes. The pages were tabbed, color-coded, and cross-referenced with the precision of someone who'd spent 7 years learning that when things go wrong, they go very wrong very quickly. "Well," I said, drawing out the word like I was calculating the square root of infinity, "if we restore from our backup systems, the ones I maintain separately because I'm paranoid like that, and rebuild the authentication infrastructure properly, and reconfigure the SSL certificates, and manually verify each client token, maybe 6 hours. If we do it right. If nothing else breaks while we're fixing it. If I skip lunch." The room held its collective breath like a yoga class doing synchronized meditation. "Do it," Greg said, and the word came out like he was surrendering in a war he'd just realized he was fighting. I'm sorry, what was that? I thought I was too slow for this team. I thought my skill set didn't match the company's needs. I thought CloudMax was handling everything seamlessly. I let each word hang in the air like smoke signals spelling out "I told you so" in ancient Vindication script. Greg's eye twitched. Actually twitched. Like a broken turn signal on a car that's about to crash into a very expensive wall. "Please," he said, and the word seemed to physically hurt him, like he was trying to swallow a pineapple whole. "Fix it. Please fix it before the board meeting at 2. "Oh, right. The board meeting. The one where he was supposed to present the successful cloud migration as evidence of his visionary leadership. The one where quarterly numbers were going to be discussed and explanations would be required for any revenue disruptions. The one that was now approximately 6 hours and 47 minutes away. I spent the next 6 hours being everyone's favorite person again, like a superhero who'd been in retirement but came back for one last world-saving mission. Restoring backups from systems that suddenly seemed prophetic rather than paranoid, rebuilding authentication infrastructure with the kind of methodical precision that makes databases purr like satisfied cats, explaining to panicked account managers why their biggest clients were currently locked out of the platform they paid premium prices to access. The CloudMax team watched me work with the fascination of people observing actual magic. Every command I typed, every configuration file I edited, every system I brought back online was accompanied by detailed explanations they frantically scribbled down like students who just realized the final exam was tomorrow and they'd spent the semester playing video games. "Why did you configure the backup authentication server with those specific timeout values?" Brad asked, his voice carrying the humble curiosity of someone whose confidence had been professionally demolished. "Because," I explained while simultaneously monitoring 4 different system recovery processes, "our client applications were built by 3 different development teams over 5 years, and each team had different ideas about how long to wait for server responses. These timeout values represent the lowest common denominator that keeps all the legacy systems happy." Around hour 3, when the first batch of client logins started succeeding, a small cheer went up from the customer service team. Around hour 4, when payment processing came back online, accounting stopped looking like they were planning to update their resumes. By hour 5, when all the demos started working again, sales was practically throwing a parade in the hallway. By 3 p.m., we were operational. Every green light on our monitoring dashboard was genuine this time, backed by actual functionality rather than wishful thinking. By 4 p.m., Greg had sent another all-hands email about learning experiences, the value of institutional knowledge, and strengthening our technical foundation, basically the corporate equivalent of "oops, my bad, turns out Lanny was right about everything." The email was a masterpiece of executive backpedaling, using phrases like strategic pivot and knowledge integration opportunities to describe what was essentially an expensive public admission that maybe firing your most experienced engineer wasn't the brilliant cost-cutting move it had seemed like on paper. By 5 p.m., I had a meeting request in my inbox for Monday morning titled Infrastructure Leadership Discussion. The calendar invite included Greg, his boss Patricia, VP of Technology, and someone from HR whose presence could mean either very good things or very bad things, with no middle ground. Monday came with an envelope on my desk, the kind of thick, expensive envelope that either contains very good news or very bad news with no affordable middle ground. Inside, a promotion letter written on letterhead so fancy it probably cost more than my lunch, a salary increase that made my mortgage payment look adorable by comparison, and a new title that made me blink twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from caffeine withdrawal. Senior Director of Infrastructure Strategy. Not just Senior Systems Administrator or IT Support Specialist or any of the other titles that made me sound like someone who fixed printers for a living. This was a title with gravitas, with authority, with the kind of job description that includes phrases like strategic technical leadership and enterprise architecture vision. As for Greg, imagine the most painful situation that you can imagine. Well, that's probably what happened to him.